Don't mind me, I'm just going to empty this funnel with a turkey baster. Because everyone needs a turkey baster in their toolkit. Now that I've got the New Year and Christmas out of the way, it's time to finally get on with the MX5. God knows why I've decided to start a project on a convertible during winter. It's currently 3 degrees, but hey ho. I've been shopping. We've got new thermostat, oil and filter to do on this as a bit of preventative maintenance, and then I might have accidentally bought something shiny for it. I'm going to start off by doing the thermostat because that actually really needs doing. I drove this to Euro car parts this morning and the temperature gauge barely blooming moved, which isn't ideal in this weather, and it's making the engine run really rich. Once I've done that, I'll go through oil and filter and then we'll fit the shiny bits. The same applies on most cars with thermostats. They're generally on the top hose. And on MX5 it's just under here, under the throttle plenum. So I'm going to take that out of the way, probably move the airbox out of the way, and then we'll be able to get on it. Before I start, I should probably explain why it's important to do a thermostat. Engines are like people. They like to be at a certain temperature. Too hot and they're hot and bothered. Too cold, they don't want to work properly. Engine to run correctly, it needs to be at the right temperature. Generally that sits somewhere between 80 and 90 Celsius. It varies from car to car, but that's a rough rule of thumb. On injected engines, they use a water temperature sensor, which is generally located either in the thermostat housing or somewhere on the head. That tells the engine computer what temperature the engine is. On a cold start, an engine needs more fuel to start. Cold start, the engine needs more fuel, and by using the engine coolant temperature sensor, it can establish how cold the engine is. If the thermostat's gone, your engine will overcool, so the ECU will always think it's in cold start, which in turn means it will always be injecting more fuel than it actually needs to run properly. Side effects of not having the engine up to temperature properly means that the heater inside the car won't work properly, which isn't ideal from a comforts perspective. But secondly, it will burn your cat out, because cats are designed to work at a certain temperature. If they're working in their cold range all the time, they'll get flooded with fuel and it'll eventually knacker all the precious metals inside. The same applies on older cars. For example, on the Mini, that's not injected, that's carburetted, but so that has a manual choke, which effectively does the same thing. It injects more fuel and blocks off the air. This is just done in a computerised way. If the thermostat was knackered in the Mini, it'd have exactly the same effect. It wouldn't run properly because it would never get up to temperature. Thermostats are super simple. They're a little tiny flap that opens and closes at a prescribed temperature, generally around what the engine is designed to run at. So for example, on a Mini, mine's I think 82 degrees, and that's roughly its running temperature. I'm not sure what it is on an MX5, but I've got a brand new one and hopefully that'll cure the problem. I'm going to start by removing this inlet pipe, as that's currently in the way. As with the B&W, the thing I actually need to get to is hidden by lots of things. I've just moved the airbox out of the way, and now that this is loose, this can just move out of the way. You don't need to disconnect everything, it's only a case of getting access to the thing we actually want. Now I've done that, I can probably remove the 4 bolts that hold the throttle body on, and then the bit we need is just underneath. With the 4 bolts out of the throttle body, I can now move this out of the way. There's the connector for the throttle actuator, which is in the way, so that can come off. And then there's 2 pipes on it, but they've got enough slack so we can just move that backwards and just leave it in the engine bay. Before you go disconnecting any pipes, it's a good idea to have a quick look. Have a look at the part you've been given and the original part. There's nothing worse than taking something off and then realising the part you've been given doesn't fit. Not that I'm mentioning any no names, Euro car parts, but we've all been there. Having a look, these are very similar, so I'm kind of happy that that's the right part. It's nice to see as well, you can see inside here, that's the thermostat. They've been the same design for, what, 50 years, 60 years? Probably even longer than that actually. All there is a spring and a piece of wax in the middle. When the wax melts, the spring allows the valve to open. It's as simple as that. And then when the wax cools down again, it does the opposite. This thing moves constantly to keep the engine at the correct temperature. But unfortunately they go bad once in a while. But luckily they're only a cheap part. In some modern cars they're electrically controlled, which are extremely expensive when they go wrong. I think this was only 30 quid from Euro car parts, so I'm not too fussed about spending that. MX5s don't use Jubilee clips as far as I've seen. They use the kind of one-time springy clip types. It's worth getting yourself some proper pliers for them. You can use mole grips, but there's nothing worse than one of those pinging off and flicking you in the eye. I think I bought a set of 10 of these off Amazon for about 20 quid. It's always worth having. We're going to start by taking the pipe off that goes into the thermostat. Generally those, as I said before, are connected to the top hose of the radiator. You're best off just sliding the clip up the pipe and just leaving it in position while you pop the pipe off. I've got a bucket under the car to catch the fluid that comes out, although we've got new coolant to put in. I've just took the top hose up out the way so we avoid losing as much coolant as possible. There's now, I think, 3 bolts on the flange that need to come out. So if you're unsure, have a look at the new part. There's 3 bolts holding it in. We just need to pop those out and then hopefully it'll just come off in our hand. I've just noticed there's a second clip on a second pipe. Probably best to take that off first. Another super useful tool to have in your toolbox are these nice long handled pliers with a rounded tip. They're really useful for pulling off pipes that are buried down in an engine bay. I pulled the 3 bolts out and managed to pull it out. Sometimes you can see on knackered thermostats straight through them. You can see where they've been open all the time, but this one doesn't appear to be. But it's definitely at fault. I think it's an original Mazda one. I'm not too up to date with Mazda part numbers, being a B&W person, but that was fairly easy. It's quite access is quite limited, but it's doable with a simple socket set. It's now just a case of putting everything back in the way it came out. So new one in, 3 bolts. Make sure your gasket isn't kinked on the way in. The last thing you want is a water leak. Right, the 3 bolts are in and tight. It's now just a case of putting the 2 coolant lines back onto the thermostat, putting the throttle body back on, and the air pipe, and then we can run it up and bleed it. And as if by magic, it's all back together. I've just loosely put the airbox back in because I'm probably going to have to take it back out when I do the oil filter, because I think it's down there somewhere. We're going to fill it with coolant now. I'm going to go inside, turn the engine on, put the heater on max heat, minimum fan, and then we'll fill it up, bleed all the air out of it, and then the oil will be nice and warm for the oil change. As with when I did the B&W, I'm going to run it up to temperature. I'm waiting for the needle to hit about midway, and then we'll check the levels. Now the coolant gauge is sitting about halfway. When I first had this, it was sitting about a quarter. Now we're up to about half. I'm going to turn the engine off now and let it cool down a bit, and we'll check the coolant level. I think it's all burped out now. I'm going to have to use a little trick to get more water in. I've only been able to get, what, a litre and a half in, and I reckon at least 2 came out. There's no heat in the cabin, even though the temperature gauge is about halfway. I've put a funnel in the expansion tank to get it higher than the rest of the cooling system. Hopefully that way I'll have a bit of headspace which will push the coolant down and let any air escape. With that funnel full of water, it should now push down and let any air come up. That was a faff. I'm so used to B&Ws that just bleed nicely. This is now expanded and all the air's popped out. It's about to overflow. It's not ideal, but I've now got heat in the cab, so at least the cooling system's properly bled. A good telltale is if it's not bled properly, you won't have any heat in the cabin, even if the temperature gauge is sitting at halfway. You want to make sure you bleed all the air out, otherwise that can lead to overheating. Don't mind me, I'm just going to empty this funnel with a turkey baster, because everyone needs a turkey baster in their toolkit. Now that the engine's scorching hot, I guess it's time to do an oil change. I'm going to jack the car up and put it on axle stand so I've got better access. Right, I'm under the car to start the oil change. The sump plug is there. There was a little cover in the way, which I've taken out of the way. And then the oil filter is tucked just up the other side of it, which could be fun to get to. I couldn't really film it, it's a bit tight under there, but some horrible person put the oil filter on horrendously tight. It's now off and draining in the oil bucket. Got myself a new filter, a Bosch in fact. So that's going to go in and then we'll drain the sump. Sump plug on these is a 17. Let's try and not chuck this all the way down me. Lovely. Right, sump plug's back in and it's tight. New sealing washer. I'll get that tray back on and then drop it on the floor and we can fill the oil back up from the top. I've just dragged the tray out from under the car. Safe to say that oil change is a bit overdue. It's a bit brown. Right, the car's back on level ground now. Annoyingly, being winter, it's about 3:30 and it's getting dark, so this is going to be the last job of the day. I've just taken the coolant reservoir cap back off again as well because the coolant level's dropped now that it's cooled down, so I can top that up as well. In terms of oil, these take 530. It's about 4.5 litres, but you'll never get all of the oil out when you do an oil change anyway. So I'm going to start with about 3.5, 3 3/4. Check the dipstick and see where we're at. Unlike the BMW, which gets genuine BMW oil to maintain my engine warranty, I've got Eurocar Parts' finest triple QX, which is about 35 quid for 5 litres. It meets all the specifications required for a Mazda engine. It's labelled Ford, but it actually has the requirements on. As long as the oil is up to the spec that the engine needs, I see it as good. I don't see the point in buying super expensive oils for engines unless you're going racing or driving the car really hard. I change my oil every 5,000 miles anyway, so I don't need the long life properties of new oils. For some reason, Mazda give you the smallest hole to pull oil through into the top of the engine. This is going to go everywhere. Oh, yep. Mazda have conveniently put the filler hole right above the exhaust manifold, so that's going to make a smoky mess when it gets hot. Before you ask, yes, I have a funnel, but it's currently being used to drain the oil drainer back into another oil container, and I don't really want to put all that gunk back into the top of the engine. Chuck it all over the exhaust, chuck it all over the top of the engine cover. Right, that's about 3.5 litres. I'm going to start it up, let the oil filter fill, and then we'll turn it off, give it 5 minutes, check the oil level again. I've let the car idle for about 10 or 15 seconds, turn it off. It's been about 3 or 4 minutes. Hopefully all the oil's drained to the bottom of the sump. We'll check the level now. It's just touching the first mark. Generally on dipsticks the 2 marks are a litre, so it probably needs almost 3/4 of a litre. And that's it for today. That's the thermostat change, so at least this thing will be running at proper temperature now. Oil's been changed because I didn't know the last time it was changed. I'm going to pick up tomorrow because it's getting dark. I'm going to fit that exhaust manifold, so hopefully that will free up a few horsepowers. And then I can get on to fixing the rear sills, which are a little bit holy. And then after that I can get around to modifying it. I'm still to decide if I'm going to drop it on its arse or lift it and do a Dakar style car. If you've got any ideas, chuck them in the comments. It's the next day, it's now Sunday, but at least it's light again. It's about -50, it's ridiculous. It's time to fit the shiny bits though. I think I mentioned I picked up this off Facebook Marketplace for about 1/3 of what they are new. And allegedly they free up about 10 horsepower. On these they run a twin cat system, so there's a cat in the downpipe and a cat in the mid-pipe. The reason for this is this car is sold in more than just the UK market, and to comply with emissions in, I think it's California and some other places, they need twin cats. But here in the UK we can remove the downpipe cat, which is the pre-cat, move the oxygen sensor behind the secondary cat, check engine light won't come on, and it will still pass its MOT whilst gaining the horsepower from this. So that's today's task. I'm going to start up top. There's a couple of heat shields that need moving out of the way to get to the exhaust manifold studs, and then we'll go under the car and release the 2 downpipe bolts that goes to the rest of the exhaust. Hopefully it's not all seized and nothing snaps, but who knows. With this heat shield out of the way, I can now get on the 4 10mm that are on top of the original exhaust manifold, get that heat shield off, and then we can go attacking the bolts that go into the head. Right, now the bolts are that loose, hopefully this will just come off. Yes, it does. Somehow. Right, and there we go. I can get to all the manifold bolts now. Loosened off the last bolt as well because there's a secondary like heat shield. So hopefully that will now come out. Ta-da! Right, we've got full access now. I'm just going to go around and whiz off these nuts. Hopefully nothing snaps. The rear nuts right up against the firewall, so luckily I've got these through socket sets, which means that the socket's super shallow, so I should be able to squeeze in with that. Right, with all those loose, the rear ones were a bit of a pig, but with a couple of wobbles you can get just on them. That should now be loosey-goosey off the head, he says. I think I've got them all. Oh, no, I've missed one. Hold fire. Right, take two. Now I've taken that extra nut off. The manifold is now loose from the head. So that pulls away nicely. However, we're still attached to the rest of the exhaust and the lambda sensors. So I'm going to have a look down underneath. The lambda sensors are on a connector, so it's easier at this point just to disconnect the connector, and then we'll pull the lambdas out when we pull it out completely. I'm going to go down below, and there's two bolts on the down pipe. We'll take those out and then see how much room we've got. The manifold attaches just here onto the downpipe, and it's held on with two 40mm nuts, so we'll just whiz those out and then we should be free. I was wiggling the exhaust manifold around and trying to work out why it wouldn't come out of the hole. I'm an idiot. If you look at the pipe going in, at the end of the pipe there's the two mounts here. Those have got nuts on them and are currently attached to the bottom of the block. That'd be why it doesn't come out. That was an absolute faff. The two studs are into a bracket. That bracket is on the block. The two studs on the exhaust are seized, but there's not enough room to swing any tool really to get enough leverage on them. So I've taken the bolt out of the bracket that goes into the block instead. I'll bring the bracket with it and then we'll sort it out when it's out. Hopefully now I've got some movement, which we do. Lovely. I've been wiggling this thing for a good 20 minutes and it's not coming out without moving something. So I've disconnected the nut off the right hand engine mount, used the trolley jack and just tilted the engine ever so slightly. So that might allow me just enough space to get it out. Problem is, in the UK we have our steering on the right hand side, and the steering column goes right past the exhaust manifold, and it closes up that gap just enough that you can't squeeze it out the top. I've watched a lot of videos of people with left hand drive ones doing these, and they seem a lot easier, and that'll be why. That seems to have done the trick. Hopefully now it'll come out, although I might be being a bit wishful. I'm getting closer. The bottom lambda sensor sticks at just the right angle that when you pull the manifold up it hooks under the steering column, which isn't ideal. I think it might have been replaced before because that came out surprisingly easy. So now that's out of the way, hopefully this thing will pop out. Ah, there we go. And there she is. And this is what causes the big restriction on MX5s apparently. That's the pre-cap. Right, now it's out, there's a couple of bits I need to do.
I need to retrieve this O2 sensor from the top. It's recessed, but luckily you can get these sockets that, it's a 22, but it's got a slot down the side so it keeps all the wires out of the way. So that can go over there, and hopefully it'll pop straight out. There she goes. Yeah, and that's intact, so we can reuse that. It's got some funky shield on it, but I think that'll be alright going in the new one. Then we can just nip that back up. Beautiful. The second one goes in this hole, which I will eventually move to the rear of the secondary cat when I put a new exhaust on the rest of it. For now I'll just deal with the check engine light that will come on because it's not registering the cats there. Beautiful. And then the last thing I need to retrieve are the two studs that are at the bottom of here. Hopefully these come out without snapping. I've got some of these stud extractor tools, which are just a socket with little roller bearings in, and they grip onto the stud. I'm going to heat the hell out of them though, try and get them loose. Here goes. And there she goes. Beautiful. That's probably quite warm. And then rinse and repeat. Just like that. Unfortunately, when using the tool to get studs in and out, occasionally you bruise the threads. You can get this kit, which is very useful. It's a thread repair kit. They're like taps and dies, but a bit blunter, really. So I've just run the M10 up and down that thread, and that's just restored them. So when I'm under the car, I haven't got to faff around with strip nuts or anything. I've transferred over the gasket at the bottom because I completely forgot to buy one. But it's in all right condition, and I'm going to replace the rest of the exhaust at some point, so I can do it then. And also, I've been in my stash and found two M10 nuts because the two studs on the bottom of the manifold, which I pulled off, snapped, which isn't ideal, but it doesn't matter because that's come off. So they can fit on there, which will fit on the bracket under the car. So now, this can go back in. Because it hasn't got the massive cat hanging off the back of it, hopefully it'll just slip down the hole without causing too many issues. Still flipping tight though. That steering column really is an arse. Scrap that, I'm going to pull the bottom lambda back out again because it catches on the way in. Right, try again. Much better. And she's in. So now it's just a case of putting the nuts back on the head, plugging the lambda sensors in, making sure they're routed away from the exhaust, do the two bottom flange nuts, what you want to call them, and put this little heat shield back that kind of protects the ABS brake situation. And that's it, I think. It's in. At the bottom, the two flange nuts are done up. I've put the bottom lambda sensor back in, plugged both lambda sensors in. I've left this heat shield off just for a second while I start it, just to check I've got no leaks. I don't think I've missed anything. I've got a lot of bits left over, but that's because there was heat shields and stuff in the way, which I'm no longer refitting. It's always confusing when you've got bits and bobs left over when you've done a job. Let's start it up and see what it sounds like. There doesn't appear to be any leaks, that's a good thing. I'm going to get that horrible heat shield back in and then drop it back on the ground. And then go for a drive, see if it's made any difference.
Right, we're out on the road. I can definitely tell a difference instantly. Between 1000 and 2000 RPM, this thing was pretty flat. I mean, MX5s aren't the slowest of things, but it was pretty boggy. Now, when pulling away in third gear, from what, 30 miles an hour at 1500 RPM, it pulls instantly. It didn't have that torque before. I'm sure with a remap I can get a few more horsepower out of this thing. It kind of concludes this video then. I've done the oil change, so at least I know that's done for a few more thousand miles, and the thermostat's done, which is well appreciated in these colder temperatures. I can't tell if the exhaust has changed, it sounds about the same. If anything, it's slightly louder, but the rest of the exhaust system's completely standard. I'm going to have a hunt around on Facebook Marketplace to see if I can find any cheaper rear sections. In the next video, I'm probably going to have a look at sorting the rust out before I modify this thing any further. The fact that I can get my hand in the sill is not ideal. If you've got any suggestions of what to do with this, chuck them down in the comments. I still haven't decided what I'm going to do in terms of modifying it, but for now I'm just going to enjoy the car. It works and it's reliable. I'll catch you on the next one.